everything from the first show, all the production sheets, the budgets, everything else. My publisher licensed the Nielsen ratings for every episode. And they would, with each show that they would do, every one of these episodes, plus quite a few that didn't get made, they would, Gene and his co-producer Bob Justman, John D.F. Black, Gene Kuhn, and story editor Dorothy Fontana, D.C. Fontana, they would exchange memos on every story, every script, every aspect of it. And so by going through all these memos and putting them together in these books, you feel like you're sitting in a room listening to them having a conversation about every single episode, one chapter for every episode, as it's being written, as it's being made. And quite a few letters coming in, memos coming in from NBC and the studio regarding the budget, regarding censorship issues, quite a few fights between Gene Roddenberry and NBC, which is really the thing that drove Star Trek off the air. There's a lot of folklore out there about it, about the ratings, about things of that nature. The ratings were nowhere near as bad as we were told. They were actually not bad at all. It was really a problem with the type of subjects that Gene was putting on the show, talking about Vietnam, racism, sexism, God, everything.
Can I ask you one question?
That is what NBC objected to, and that's what finally took the show off the air.
Well, wasn't it the first one of the scenes where Captain Kirk kissed, not the yeoman, but the, I'm trying to think of her name. She's black, and that caused a lot of, problems when that happened.
That was the first interracial kiss, Gary, and that happened during the third year. It was an episode called Plato's Stepchildren, and it was William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols, Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura, and they kissed on the lips for the first time in 1968 on network television. There had been an episode, Nancy Sinatra had a special the year before, and Sammy Davis Jr. came out and kind of buffed her on the cheek, as they used to say in Hollywood, and that was probably the first time, or the first known time, I won't say probably, but the first time that a black man kissed a white woman on a network TV show. But it was on the cheek, and they were friends. He was buddies with her dad. But this was a scripted show, and the network had a problem with it, and they were on the sidelines watching this kiss taking place and insisting that they not touch lips and things of that nature. Shows you how much the world has changed. But, Star Trek tried to do that 2 seasons earlier with an episode called The Alternative Factor. And it was going to be John Drew Barrymore and a black actress named Janet McLaughlin. And NBC thought it was a Scottish actress from the stage. She hadn't done any TV. And they knew who John Drew Barrymore was, and were very excited to have him on the show. And when they found out that it was going to be white and black, they had the romantic elements taken out of the script, and that kind of gutted the story, made it one of the worst Star Treks ever made, because all this rewriting took place the day before they were going to film, and the first day of production. And John Drew Barrymore, and it just was kind of like a domino effect, where the whole thing fell apart. So I was always interested why some episodes were great, why some didn't work out. So Drew Barrymore, why? What happened to make this episode not quite find itself where the other ones could? And so that's part of the fun for me of researching and writing the books, and part of the fun for fans when they read the books.
Well, didn't they?
That was shooting around the world. So, of course, that was a very expensive series to make. And Star Trek was number 2. Mission Impossible was number 3 in the budgets. It seems like it was a small budget, because if I tell you how much, you're going to say, well, that's tiny. The first season, it was the average episode was $195,000. And then they brought it down to $187 for season 2 and $173 for season 3. They kept crunching it down, the studio and the network. But $195,000 was not bad for 1966 when the show premiered. The average show that year had a budget usually of about $150,000, and that would be like about $1.5 million. The Star Trek budget would have been close to $2 million per episode in today's money. So that's not that bad, but you have to remember, they had to invent everything. They couldn't go to Western costumes and get costumes. They couldn't go to the prop houses and get the props. Anything you saw on this show had to be invented and made, because they didn't exist yet. So it wasn't like doing a Western or a cop show or a hospital show or anything like that. They had to create a planet every week, and that's what put the budget through the ceiling.
Well, I know I was so disappointed when the show was canceled. I mean, in my mind, I couldn't figure out why, because, I was hooked to it along with a lot of people, I can see maybe the racial thing because, I got to know about 6 months before Robert Culp passed on. He had a website and, I would send him messages and, he ignored me. And then finally he replied to something I said and he was really sarcastic. And then I said something back, and all of a sudden we became friends, and we started, emailing each other quite often. And he told me a lot about how, when he was approached to do the show, that he demanded that Bill Crosby be in it, and it was the first black actor to have a starring role. And the thing you talk about, the wireless microphones they use, that was I think that he was telling me one of the very first shows that ever did that.
The first, yeah. It was an Egyptian fellow named Fouad Sayed, S-A-I-D, but Sayed, and he was American, but he was from Egypt, and he was a young guy, and he approached Sheldon Leonard, and he said, "I hear you're going to be filming this around the world. I can help you." And he had these wireless microphones he was making. He didn't invent them, but it was the first time they were being used in a television show. And he brought in the Aeroflex camera, which was a fraction of the size of the cameras that were being used on stage, on studios. And he brought in quartz light kits instead of these giant arc lights. And he built this thing called the Cinemobile, where he would load everything into this thing. And he even had a platform that could raise on the top of it. And they would put this thing inside a flying tiger and fly it to wherever they were going to be filming. And so that's how they were doing this show all around the world. Nobody thought it could be done. NBC didn't think it could be done. But the real innovation for that show, as you just mentioned, was the racial aspect. There had never been that type of casting before. There had been Amos and Andy, which most blacks hated, and I understand why. There had been Beulah, which was a sitcom about a black maid working for white people. And there was Rochester on the Jack Benny Show. And there had been a short-lived series called East Side, West Side, which had Cicely Tyson as George C. Scott's secretary.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a welfare worker in the slums of New York. So there wasn't great variety for black actors. And they brought Bill Cosby in to play an American spy traveling the world, carrying a gun, shooting at white spies, Russians, and things like that. And it never happened. And to show to tell your audience how new and pioneering this was, a headline that ran on the front page of Daily Variety the year before I Spy premiered, when the pilot had been made and the CBS and NBC had decided they were going to put it on the air, said NBC to start a Negro in a 60-minute drama. And in the copy, it said, and he's not going to have to sing or dance. and the subtitle was to see which way the winds are going to blow in Dixie, because they didn't know if the Southern affiliates would carry a show like this. So it was a very experimental show to see if it could get clearance on enough network affiliates to stay on the air. It did. It became a top 10 show, and that opened the doors for 1 year later for Star Trek to have an interracial crew, and for Greg Morris to be on Mission Impossible, and then you had Daktari came on, and then you had Ironside, and you start in Room 222, and you had all these shows where you were starting to get black actors in recurring roles that were not stereotypical roles, and then that opened the door a bit wider for shows like Chico and the Man and so forth. So so I Spy was the show that really kicked those doors open and stuck its neck out. And you're absolutely right about Robert Culp. Sheldon wanted Bill Cosby, and they went and made a test episode in Hong Kong, and he sent it back to NBC. And when they saw that they had put a black actor in there, they said, "Well, we don't know if we can go with this." And Sheldon and Bob Culp both united and said, "If you're not going to let him go, we're not going to do it." And they very much wanted this show. Sheldon Leonard was one of the top producers in TV, doing the Andy Griffith Show, Dick Van Dyke Show, Danny Thomas Show. But he was tired of sitcoms. He wanted to do an hour-long drama. He wanted to travel. Bob Cope was one of the top stars on TV. He'd had a series called Track Down, and he was a guest star on all these shows, and everybody wanted him for a series. But they didn't want Bill Cosby. But the minute that show got on the air, everybody wanted Bill Cosby.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, a lot of people don't know about Shelton. He was a famous gangster in, a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, great actor.
Yeah, he was an actor, and he played a gangster in movies and on radio. And Bob Cope always did a great impression of Sheldon Leonard, because they butted heads a lot on that show. Bob was wonderful. I did 7 interviews at his house with him for that book, and he was so open, and his ethics were just great. I mean, I would ask him a question, and he would look down at the floor for about 30 seconds, not with every question, but certain questions, and like, did you and Sheldon get along? And he would look down at the floor, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, better ask the next question. And he would look up and he'd say, oh, what the hell, let's do it. And he would start to answer it. But he would think that carefully about it. Do I really want to say this? Do I really want to say something that it may be bad or be heard as bad about Sheldon and how we got along? And so I really respected him. And what a lot of people don't know is Robert Cope co-created that series.
Oh, he wrote a lot.
He wrote the first script, called The Tiger, which was made during the first season, by the way, and he wrote it and brought it in where he was going to play an espionage agent who masquerades as an athlete and travels the world. And he brought it into Carl Reiner, and Reiner sent him down the hall to see Sheldon Leonard, and he told Sheldon his idea and gave him the script, and Sheldon read the script, and he comes back and he says, I like your idea, but I like mine better. And he says, 2 spies, 1 white, 1 black. The white guy's a tennis player, the black guy's his trainer, they travel the world. And Cope said, you're right, yours is better. Now, it was the same idea for a series, but adding this other character. And so you may notice, if anybody knows the show or likes the show or watches the show still, you may notice there's not a created by credit on I Spy. It just says Sheldon Leonard presents I Spy, because it was really a co-creation between him and Cope.
Oh, yeah.
And Cope owned a piece of the show and so forth. And Cope wrote a lot of the scripts, the formative scripts, and he was nominated for an Emmy for one of those scripts. He taught Bill Cosby to act. And he had a fun little signal with the director of photography. If they were doing lines and he could tell Bill was in trouble, he would give the signal to the director of photography, and the director of photography would yell, all right, cut, let's stop, I have to adjust the lights. 10 minutes. And so Bob would take Bill into out in the alley, wherever they were filming. I'd say into the dressing room, but they usually didn't have dressing rooms, unless they were back at Desilu doing some interiors. But they were filming all around the world. He'd take him out in the alleyway, and he would work the scene out with Bill so they could come out and do it well. And this, and then every year the show was on, both of them were nominated and competing against each other for an Emmy as best lead in a dramatic hour-long series. And every year, Bill Cosby won. And I asked Bob how he felt about that. And he said, I felt vindicated because I knew we needed him. And I knew this was so important for television. And I figured I'll win Emmys down the road. But this has to go to Bill. This is important. And he was right.
Oh, yeah. And, one of the texts he was telling me about, he at one point was burned out. And he didn't know if they wanted to do another season. And, and he was talking to Shelton and Bill Crosby, and maybe it was Bill Crosby that didn't want to do it. I can't remember now. But, but then Bill Crosby said, to Robert, well, you know what? If you want to do another season, let's do another season. But then all of a sudden they got the notice they were canceled, and they had high ratings. Now, do you know why they were canceled, out of curiosity?
Yeah. This is a really interesting story, Gary. This is one of those strange things. And it happened with the Star Trek books, and it happened with this book, where you're writing a book about these people, writing about the show, but I'm writing about everybody who made the show. It's a biography of a TV series. I turn into flesh and blood, because it is flesh and blood people coming together. And so I'm interviewing them, and I ended up bringing them information that they finally found out why the show got canceled. And the reason it didn't get canceled.